Hello and welcome to Chroma. I'm Mark Lemon, and in association with Murphy's Magic, I'm here today to talk you through everything you've purchased and how to get the most out of it. So what is Chroma? Well, Chroma is a way of learning a colour that's been merely thought of by your spectator. And that's achieved under the guise of a really fun sort of test or experiment, however you want to present it. But at the end, not only will you know that colour, I'm going to show you ways to capitalise on that and appear to be reading your spectator's deepest thoughts and memories. So what have you received? Well, to be honest, it's a plastic card. There's not much else to it. I expect the packaging probably cost more to produce than the card. But this card's been really specifically designed, and there's many key features to it that are going to allow you to do this really easily, really simply, and without any memory work. So it's based on a Stroop test. And a Stroop test was a test that's credited to John Ridley Stroop, a professor that was studying human psychology, I think. And the idea of the test was that he was going to test the difference in speed between somebody being able to read colours printed in black ink, colours printed in different coloured inks, and then how quickly people could recount and tell him the colour of the ink rather than the colour that was printed in that ink, which sounds very confusing, and I think that was the idea of it. It was supposed to just test cognitive ability of his subjects. So I built a test around that, and I built this card that looks like something that maybe you'd pick up in a design museum or a science museum. And these choices of colours and the colours of ink they've been printed in are very specific and are going to allow you, under the guise of the test or the experiment that you're going to ask your spectator to go through, well, it's going to enable you to know the colour that they're thinking of without them telling you. It's based on a binary principle, and my first memories of the binary principle were actually from when I was a kid. I really got into magic seriously later on in my life, but when I was around 5 or 6 years of age, I remember receiving as a small birthday present a Paul Daniels effect, and it was this little plastic wallet, and it had some cards in it with many numbers, different numbers printed all over these cards. And I think there were all the numbers up to maybe 100. I can't remember what the exact range of these numbers were, but the idea was you had these 6 or 7, maybe 8 cards, and you'd ask somebody to look at a card and see if their number that they've chosen in their head is printed on that card. And they'd tell you, they'd go through each of them, telling you whether the number was on there, whether it wasn't on there. And at the end, you could use these cards, and with a process of addition, by adding up like the number in the top corner or something, you were able to reveal the person's thought of number. And I thought about that again recently. I'd say recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, I thought, well, what was the first trick that I actually learned? And that's the one that came to mind. And I could think back to that magic trick. And I thought, well, that's quite an interesting principle. I did some more research into it, and it's kind of commonly known as the binary principle. His were not very well disguised, although it was an interesting effect. I'm sure it was really sort of designed for kids, and hence I was like 5 or 6 years of age when I received it. But I thought it'd be really nice if there could be a justified way in which to achieve something similar. And I also wanted to streamline it down and reduce the number of props in play and kind of reduce the process and make the process seem justified as well. So that's when I came up with this. I'd always been interested in the Stroop tests and these colour cognition tests, and thought it'd be a really nice justification and reason to get your spectator to go through this process. So I'll get more into how to use the props in a minute, but that's basically the history of Stroop test as I understand it. There's a lot more information on the internet and on Wikipedia, for example. And that's also some history with Paul Daniels' trick that I did have many years ago. So I'll talk you through how this works. It works based on a binary principle, and that binary principle is going to tell you the colour they're thinking of merely by whether they can find it on the front of the card or the back of the card. So let's go over some labelling here. This is the side of the card that I'm calling the front. And the front is the one where in big letters it says Colour Cognition Test Card. Whilst the design of this might change slightly, it's going to look almost identical to this. This is not a final production one. The one you receive might look slightly different to this. So this side here is the front, the one with color cognition test card written at the back. And this will be the back of the card. And it's the one with the black bar with some text at the bottom. So the back of the card is this one, front of the card is this one. And that's in relation to you, the one facing the camera. Front of the card here. And we're going to ask them to find their color that they're thinking of, written in different colored inks. And that's going to be a challenge for them. It's going to be kind of made to be a game, a test, an experiment. And we're going to time them while they're doing it. And the timing's completely irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. It's just a presentational piece. And it's justification of them going through this process. Because we're going to use the time that it takes them to finish the experiment as a kind of pseudo gauge as to how much of a cognitive color or visually cognitive thinker that they are. And that's the way I justify it. You might find other justifications and presentations, but I use the timer and that works for me. So back to this binary principle, and binary principle we're going to be using is utilizing a sum that we're going to be creating in our head. And that sum is either +1, +2, +4, and +8 to create this sum, depending on whether they find their color on the front of the card or the back. So we're going to ask them to find their color 4 times in total, once in black ink, once in blue ink, once in green ink, and finally in red ink. If they find their color at any time on the front of this card, we're just going to add 0 to our total. We're not going to change our total at all. But anytime they find it on the back, that's where we're going to put that binary principle into play with the 1, 2, 4, and 8. So when we ask them to find their color in black ink, if they find it on the back of the card in black ink, in our head we think +1. If they find their color written on the back of the card in blue ink, that's +2. If they find it on the back in green ink, that's +4. And if they find it on the back in red ink, that's +8. So there's the 1, 2, 4, and 8, depending on where they find their color in the ink that we've asked them to find it in. Anytime they find their color written on the front, that's 0. The color will only ever be on the front or the back in that color independently. There won't be, for example, the color brown written in black ink on both sides. It will only ever be on one side. But that's all the information you're going to need to know their exact color. So that's black, blue, green, and red. If you can't remember the order to ask those colors in, it's actually on the back of the card, the first 4 colors here are written in that order, in this first column on the left-hand side. Black, blue, green, and red. I remember those colors because for me they were one of the very first electronic products that I bought was a Pro Mystic multi-dimensional color cube, and that was the series of colors on the color cube. So that's how I remember them, but they're in alphabetical order. So black, blue, green, and red. Of those 4 colors, they're in alphabetical order there, which helps. So a little run through of an example would be, let's say they're thinking of the color green. We don't know that at the time. We're going to say to them, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to get a color in mind. Tell me when you've got one. And they say, yes, I've got one. Go, right. I'm going to hand you the card. When I do, I'm going to ask you to find your color written in different colored inks. So first of all, I'm going to hand it to you, tell you the ink color to find it, and say go. As soon as you found it written in that colored ink, bearing in mind there's 2 sides to this, so it could be on the back rather than the front. As soon as you find it, say yes. Give me an affirmation that you found it. I'm going to hand you the card now and start the timer. Find your card written in black ink. Go. And then I hand them the card. And now I have to watch to see whether they find it on the front of the card or whether they find it on the back of the card. And that's all I'm watching for. You could actually watch out of the corner of your eye and just see the rotation of the card if you don't want to appear to be paying too much attention to which side of the card they're on. But you just watch them. And in this example, they're thinking of the color green, and you say to them, find it in black ink, go. So now I'm watching them to see if they find it here. If they say yes, then I know that it's on this side of the card. But in this example with green, they won't find it on the front, they'll turn it to the back, and there I see it on the back in black ink. So they'll say yes. And immediately they say yes. I say, now find it in blue ink. And they'll look on this card. They will see it on the back as again now in blue ink. So I can see green here written in blue ink. So they'll say yes. So I've thought in my head that's +1 for them finding it in black ink on the back. Now they've found it in blue ink on the back. So that's +2. So in my head that's a total of 3. Now I say to them, find it written in green ink. And they'll look on the back. Then they'll turn it over to the front and they'll say yes, found it. And I say, and finally, find it written in red ink. And they'll say yes. And they'll find it in red ink on the front as well. So in that scenario, they found it on the back for black and they found it on the back for blue. So that's +1 and +2, which is the total of 3. Because the final two colours, green and red, they found on the front. So that was 0 and 0. So that tells me it's 3. That's the total at the end. And then if I look on the back, the third colour down is green. So I know that they were thinking of the colour green. So that's how this whole crib's built in. If you can just keep track of doing that sum in your head, the back of this card will tell you exactly what colour they're thinking of based on its position. Starting at the top colour here and working our way down the first column and then onto the second column from top to bottom. So in that example, green tells me 3, so it's in the third position. I'll run through another example now. So let's say they're thinking of the colour purple. So they're thinking of the colour purple. I say to them, okay, you've got a colour in mind. They say, yeah. You say, don't say it out loud. They haven't told you what the colour is. And you say to them, I'm going to hand you the card in a second and I'm going to start the timer. I'm going to tell you what colour to find your colour written in. So I'm going to tell you the colour of ink to find your colour written in. I know it sounds confusing. That's the idea of the Stroop test. It's supposed to be confusing. So I'm going to hand you the card and I want you to find your colour written in black ink. Go. So they're going to look on the front for the colour purple written in black ink. And there it is on the back. So they're going to say yes. They're looking at the back. So in my head that's +1 because they found it in the back, on the back in black ink. So +1. Now I'll say to them, find it in blue ink. And there it's going to look. And yes, so it's on the back. So it's there in blue ink on the back. So I know that's +2 in my head. So I'm thinking of 3 in total. That's +1 plus a +2. So that's 3 in total. So I'm up to 3 in total. Now I say find it in green ink. And they'll say yes, because they'll find it on the back here. So that's +4. So now I'm up to 7 because of the +1, the +2, the +4. I'm up to 7 in my head. And I'll say, and finally find it in red ink. And they'll say yes. And I stop the timer at exactly the point they say yes. And because they found it on the front, then I know that that's a +0. So I'm at the total of 7. So I know if I turn to the back of this card, the 7th colour down is going to be their colour. And if we have a look on the back here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is purple. So I know they were thinking of purple in that example. I've remembered that there are 7 in each column on here. So I would know instantly if I got 7, I'd just have to look at the very bottom colour in the first column. So that's how it works. I'll run through a couple